Welcome to Book 3, Chapter 1 of Soul of the Story. I am your host, your guide, as we delve into the soul of the story of Kirsten Beyer, author, teleplay writer, producer, showrunner, just so many extraordinary things. Kirsten, thank you so much for being here.
It is my pleasure, as always, to see you, Derek.
It's great. It's great to see you. I have a story, but we'll get to that.
All right.
But I did see you like 2 or 3 years ago
Yeah,
at
shortly.
Shore Leave,
Yeah,
right?
we
At
did that
Shore
right after.
Leave. That was so much fun. You came in graciously and you did that, and you did like a mock writers room, which was my first time in a mock writers room. And it just really gave me so much information and elevated like what happens in
Yeah.
the writers room. So it was just, oh my God, it was so good. So thank you for that, and we'll get to that. But one of the first things I wanted to ask you is what was that first spark for you as a kid that let you know or kind of gave you an inkling that you wanted to do something creative? Do you know, what was it, a thing, or do you remember what it was?
So there's a couple of things.
Okay.
I was performing on stage before I was really conscious. Like I think my mom started me in dance when I was 2, and I don't
Mm.
have a ton of memories around that. Like there are moments on stage that I can sort of flash to things where like I remember the costume. Like I remember one year, I think I was probably like 3.5 or 4, they did Cinderella, and that was a very big deal for me because Cinderella was my favorite story, and I was a rabbit and not a bird, which was quite upsetting because I really wanted to be the bird, but whatever. And then I remember, so like for me, performance is creation. It sort of has at the end of the day, it's all just storytelling. And the
Right.
instrument is what differs, right? But so I
Mm.
started out as a dancer and then an actor. But like I also very specifically remember being about 12. And
Mm.
up until that point, like recitals, which was the only real dance performance that I would do, were a scary, scary thing, right? You're going to do 4 or 5 numbers in the show, and like it's all, and I was
That's
always very
scary.
nervous. I was very nervous before them, like the butterflies in the stomach and the whole thing, right? And then I was 12, and we got to the recital. And for the first time, instead of just doing like songs selected from whatever was popular, we were doing a story ballet. And it was the story of this little girl who was in a dance class who everybody else was perfect and she was not. And I was the girl who was not. Um, and, uh, and so there was a story to tell. And I remember standing backstage and being like, I'm not nervous. Why am I not nervous? I don't get it. Why am I not nervous? And then I realized it's because I wasn't going to be myself out there. I was going to be somebody else. And um, and so it didn't really matter because it wasn't me.
You were pretending. You were pretending to
Yeah,
be
I
someone
just
else.
pretend. Yeah, yeah. And from that point on, really, like all of this stuff has just been like, this is how I enter the world. This is how I process the things that happen to me in my life. This is how I am wired, and it doesn't really matter what version of that I'm using or doing. It's just something I have to do to remain sane as a human being.
That's fantastic. So did you pursue that feeling? Did you pursue acting?
Yeah. Yeah, I got all the way through graduate school. I got my master's of fine arts in acting, so I could teach
Oh,
this shit at the
wow.
college level, right? Um,
Wow.
But, then I got out of graduate school, and that was the first time in my life there was not a regular schedule of you're going to be doing 8 shows this year and this one, it was all about like, okay, so now what's going to happen? And I also got married right as soon as I got out of graduate school. My husband and I met at UCLA, and he was also an actor. And
Mm.
um, and he was much more successful than I was by the time we got to school. So like he was leaving school to go do movies and shit. And so I got out into the real world, and it was time to get a regular job, which we had to do because we had to like live and eat and all of that stuff. And
All artists.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And we had agents, we were going on auditions. We both actually got cast in a thing shortly out of graduate school that was very cool. It was the very first show that the Geffen Playhouse ever did as the Geffen. It was the inaugural production. It was a show called Quills by a brilliant playwright named Doug Wright, and it starred Howard Hessman, who was amazing, and a guy named Martin Rayner, who you might remember from the Voyager Captain Proton episode. He was
Right,
Ionica,
right,
right?
right, right.
Yeah, Martin was in that.
Mm.
And David and I were both in that. And that was like, it was funny because it was awesome. Like, oh my God, we're doing a show with the Geffen, right? Oh my God. And also, it was the first time I'd ever done a run of something for like, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks, whatever it was, like 8 shows a week. And I got to about the third week and I was like, this is boring as fuck. Like, it's hard to just keep. And I
To
was like,
keep that level, right? To
yeah,
keep that
I'm like,
level up.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm like I did
yeah.
it because you do, but
Right, right.
I do remember being like, I don't enjoy this nearly as much as I thought I was going to. Now, I didn't have a huge part in it or anything. It wasn't like, but still, it was just like, that was interesting, right? And then, yeah, it was shortly after that that David got cast in a show that I wasn't in. And I found myself at home alone, very long nights with nothing to do. And that was
Mm,
when Voyager first premiered. And that's the first Star Trek show I ever watched from the moment it premiered till the moment it ended as it aired. And, got into that story. I mean, I'd seen a bunch of TOS, I'd seen a bunch of TNG, I'd seen a little Deep Space Nine. After that, I
right.
would go back and I would watch all of Deep Space Nine. But Voyager was the first one that I ever just followed from the very beginning, and that was
So,
wild.
wow. Well, Voyager's phenomenal. So, in a lot of ways, Voyager was your gateway into Trek, right? Which is
Yeah,
a
I mean, like
great,
I said, I knew I liked Trek, but I didn't know it the
right,
way I know. You know what I mean?
right, right. Of course, of course. Wow. It's very interesting because when I was like not so much in high school, but in college, I took some acting, I took some stage directing and stuff like that, and I realized that I was thinking maybe about trying to do act. I was like, it's not for me. I'm always wanted to be more of a director and writer. But what I realized is that I could pull things. I was learning Stanislavski, I was learning method, and I was like, oh, I can use this in my writing. So you are now watching Voyager. How did you watching? Because I want to ask you so many questions. But first of all, let's go with you're watching Voyager. How did that transition into you working for Star Trek?
Okay, so I'm watching Voyager, and I'm really watching it initially because I knew a couple people who had auditioned for the show,
Okay.
and then I actually knew a lady named Kim Friedman who directed a couple of the early episodes, had worked with us at UCLA. We had this whole like director television acting workshop thing that she was part of.
Hmm.
And I never knew anybody personally who had like done a thing, and I just wanted to watch her work and see like what. And we were maybe 5 or 6 episodes into Voyager. And something happened to me that had literally never happened, which was I had an idea for an episode. Now, I had been like, so I got an English degree and a theater arts degree before I got my MFA. I was always a really good writer. Like every now and
Hmm.
again, I would submit like poetry or essays or stuff for competitions, and I'd win little things, like whatever. But here was the thing: I hated writing. I was really good at it, but I hated it. I was like the girl who would start the paper at 10 o'clock at night and end up with 40 pages and get an A and like whatever. But I didn't care because I didn't like doing it. Right.
I understand that. Right, right.
And so, whereas I loved being on stage. So I'm sitting there watching it, and I have this idea for an episode. And the next day at work, because my husband and I worked at the same place, we were both worked at Spelling Entertainment out of graduate school. I told him the story, and he was literally like, "Well, what are you going to do? Write it?" And I was like, "I think I will."
I
And
think,
so,
yeah, I think
and so I did. And you know, I had no idea at the time that Star Trek was the only place in the universe where you could go as an unrepresented writer and actually submit material to them, because by then they knew that fans had a lot of good ideas. Now, the other piece
right.
that, like, I went into that thinking the idea of this whole process is for me to sell this script to them. The actual idea by that time was to get pitch meetings, but I didn't know that because I didn't know anything about anything. So I
Right.
sent them, I wrote a script and I sent it to them. I signed my release and I sent it off. And I waited, I don't know, months. And then it came back with coffee stains on it and whatever. And no, thank you. And I was like, okay. But by then I had written my second one, right? And I sent that in and nothing.
This is great.
And yeah. And but by then, this was the other thing. I knew I was a writer because those I couldn't control when somebody was going to cast me in something and when I was going to get to, I'm going to apologize for the airplanes. We're outside. This is going to happen.
No, it's okay. I apologize for sounds of New York, so it's okay.
So I but acting nobody had to pay me to do, or writing nobody had to pay me to do.
Writing, yeah, you had more control.
I had complete control over whether or not I stayed sane. Like I couldn't wait for somebody else to let me do art. And and even at that time I thought back, one of our teachers at UCLA, Mel Shapiro, who was a Tony Award winning director, had said to us, all of us early on, he said all this really amazing stuff that just kind of went in one ear out the other because I didn't get it because I was so young. But he was like, those of you who can create your own material are going to work for the rest of your lives. Those of you who can't probably won't. And I was like, okay, whatever. Turns out. So by then I was writing. I had done those 2 scripts. I decided the next thing I did was I took my favorite novel of all time and I decided to adapt it just to see if I could.
What is your favorite novel of all time?
At that time, it was A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. And what's so funny is that about the time I was done and trying to figure out how to reach John Irving and see if I could talk to him about it or whatever, all the info comes out in the trades that they're making Simon Birch, which was an adaptation of Owen Meany that I was not terribly fond of. But, it was all like I had this weird sense that I was like, I'd entered into this place where I was connecting to all of the stuff that was happening.
Feel like you were in alignment, right?
Because it was the same thing like on Voyager. Like once I started writing stuff for them, I would come up with an idea and the next week it would be on the show and I'd just be like, yeah. And I mean, it was like little things like, it's Kess's birthday. And I'm like, what? It's Kess's. But I knew they weren't like reading my diary. It was just like, this is what happens when you start paying attention in the way people who make this stuff pay attention. So I did that. And then I started writing like my own pilots. And I had a lot of like good things, getting very close, awesome stuff kind of happening. But nothing really came to fruition until, 4 seasons into Voyager. I think it's the 2nd or 3rd episode of the 4th season. It's called Nemesis airs. And that episode was so bad it made me mad. It like literally made me angry. So I wrote a very snotty letter to Jerry Taylor, who was the showrunner at the time. And I told her I was supposed to be working for her. And she called my bluff and said, fine, come in and pitch. And I was like, oh. Does anybody know what pitching is? I have no idea what that is. So, but this was like the early days of the internet, right? And so people would put the damnedest thing, I mean, they still do, up there. But like I was able to find, there were some people who had already done these pitch meetings, right? And talked about just what they did and what the response was like. Whenever. So I was just like, oh my God. It's like, I wasn't going in there ice cold. I kind of knew what I had to do, right? And the first person that I ever pitched to was Brian Fuller, who at that time was kind of a baby writer on Voyager.
Right.
And what was awesome about that, unlike, because not every pitch meeting goes this way, no matter who you are, how good you are, or whatever. Sure, Brian was incredibly patient, and he was always looking for something in a story that like he was excited about, right? So I didn't feel like I was there taking up time he didn't want to spend. He would sit there very patiently, let me go from the beginning to the end, and then we would talk about it, right? And every time I pitched to him, which I ended up doing several times, he would be like, this one I like, and this one I like, and I'm going to float those in the writer's room. And then I got into this sort of period where they started having me pitch to Mike Taylor instead of Brian Fuller. And Mike is a very different guy, and I didn't know how to pitch to him. By the second time, I broke the code, but the first time I went in and pitched him, I did just like I did for Brian, and he was bored out of his mind and couldn't follow anything. He couldn't follow a story from the beginning to the end unless I started with a little bit of an intro. He needed to know the characters involved, what's the cool sci-fi hook, and like how does it roughly end up, right?
Right.
And once I told him that and he could focus his mind on that, I could sit and tell him the whole story. But without that, he was lost, right? So it's just fascinating to figure out. You have to figure, when you do this, you have to figure out what other people need from you in a pitch because it's never the same
Right.
thing.
And adapt to them, not the
Yeah.
other way around.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
adapt. Right. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes
So,
a lot of sense.
yeah.
A lot of.
But yeah, I mean, so like over those years of Voyager, just from the beginning, I spent that time studying Voyager, like watching, timing out scenes, figuring out how many characters are in a scene, like how does this all, what is this? How does this work? And then I started doing the similar things with other shows I loved, like Buffy,
Right.
like just like starting to, I don't know, just starting to think about it all differently, right?
This is so nuts because I did a lot of the same things in a different way. Like I would turn on there was a Star Trek Strange New Worlds anthology, right? Contest,
Yes,
right?
yes, 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 yes. Before the show.
Right.
That was that thing, the other thing. Yeah.
Right. That was the other thing, which was
Yeah.
great because on both sides of it,
Yes.
film and for
Yep.
television and for the publishing side. So
Mhm.
that was what I was made aware of. So I just started watching Star Trek, but I would watch it and I would be at my desk and the television would be behind me. And so I would hear the actors and hear their tone and their syncopation and their pauses and intonations, right? And so I would get to hear their voices. And then I bought every Star Trek production book I could get my hands on because I said, I don't want to know. I mean, at the time, I'd be honest, I said, I don't want to read the Star Trek stories. I want to know the heads of the people I want to be in the heads of the people that are creating this thing.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. So it's really interesting that we have this kind of thing, but I think that's the best way to get into something. You've got to do your research. You got to do your homework. So my question for you now was, as a writer, well, two questions. First, as a writer, what if anything did you pull from your acting experience as you're writing? Did you use any techniques or?
Not so much techniques, but just like in order to inhabit another character
Right.
as an actor, you have to understand their psychology and the story that they are moving through in incredible detail
Yes.
because you're living every moment of it. And if you're not, it's obvious to us, right, as an audience. So I already had that ability hardwired into me, even though I didn't really know it.
Mhm.
And what happens in the writing, particularly in dialogue, is that I just know, that thing of like actually being upset, like I would never say it that way. Like I do that for them in my head when I'm writing. And I'm like, they would never do it that, like, you know what I mean? And some of it is that thing you're talking about where you've heard their voice so many
Right.
times and you started to pick up, right? And some of it is just like the psychology of it,
Right.
like I'm trying to tell a story and I already know what I want to happen. And I go to make that happen. And then the character says, I'm not doing that. Like I'm literally trying to force them to get to the next scene and they won't come along for
They
the ride.
won't do it.
And I'm like, okay, well, but you guys work for me. They're like, no, not really. So that always tells me I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
I'm using them instead of actually following their organic path through this story. So
and to be aware of that,
and to be aware of that, yeah.
But some people just plow through, but you have to be cognizant of that, or you'll fail if you don't.
Yeah, it just goes to how deep of a story you're telling, how many levels there are going to be at play. Because there's always the surface, here's what happened. But that's never what the story's about, right?
Right, never. So was your first professional sale, what was your first professional sale as a writer?
So while I'm doing all this Voyager stuff, I'm also hanging out on the early days of the internet. And there is this woman named Heather Jarman who is writing this article for this one. There's this website, I don't even remember what it was now, but they used to do the funniest Voyager reviews every week. Like the guy who reviewed them was just hilarious. And then there were these other columns, and she had a column called Confessions of a Voyager Virgin, which I just thought the title was funny, so I clicked on it. And her writing about it, I also found really interesting. And I literally have done this like 3 or 4 times in my life, ever tried to make contact with somebody who I found on the internet, but I did with her. And she and I became best friends for life. And for that time, for a very long time, we were writing partners. So
Wow.
as I was getting to pitch all these things to Voyager, she and I would talk stories and like, she would help me, like whatever. And then she got hired. She got Marco Palmieri discovered her in the same way through that art, that thing that she was writing, that column.
Strange New Worlds, right, right.
And well, no, she wasn't in Strange New Worlds. She
Oh,
literally had this internet column that she wrote
oh, through the
about.
column, right.
It was criticism about, and they got to talking. And even though she was writing about Voyager, Deep Space Nine was her passion, as and was Marco's. And he ended up inviting her to write her first book. And so she called me and she's like, "Oh my God, they're gonna have me write a book. What am I going to do?"
Woo!
And I was like, well, first of all, I'm going to watch all of Deep Space Nine now because now I need to know it, right? And so I did all of that, and I was sort of her beta reader, and like,
Wow, right.
as through her first novel, and then short story, and like whatever. And at some point in that process, she reached out to Marco, and she said, "Who at Simon and Schuster is doing the Voyager books? Because I know this girl who has developed a ton of stories for Voyager, and now by that time Voyager was off the air.
It's off
And
the
there was
air,
nothing I
yeah.
could do with them, right? I just had this pile." And he was like, "Oh," and so he gave me the nice lady's name and phone number. And I reached out to her, and then I sent her overnight like a package of writing samples for like whatever. And she called me 24 hours later and we started talking. And I was certain that this was going to be my first novel, that this was going to happen. And so she and I were talking about it. I was sending her stuff, she was sending it back. And then one day she like fell off the face of the earth and stopped returning emails. I had no idea what happened.
Wow.
And so at that point, Heather said, "Well, I'm about to go to this thing I've never been to called Shore Leave, and Marco will be there. So why don't you come with me as my guest and I'll introduce you to Marco?" So she did. And I spent that weekend hanging out with her. And it was kind of towards the end of the whole con that we were sitting in the bar and he sort of sat down. He's like, "Okay, so what is your deal exactly?" And I told him, and he's like, "Okay." I told him about Jessica and the whole. He's like, "Okay, send me your stuff. I'm probably going to be taking it over, and we'll talk soon." And then I don't know how many months it was later. I think it was 3 or 4 months later. I got a call one day from Marco. And he said, "Okay, we're going to do a 10-year anniversary anthology for Voyager. And it's a collection of short stories, and we're going to have you write one of the short stories." And I was like, "Oh my God, awesome, cute." Click. And a couple hours later, he calls me back and he's like, "And we're going to do a trilogy of books. And Jeff is going to write the first one, and Heather's going to write the third one, but you're going to write the middle one." And I was like, "Awesome, I'm in." And that was the first day that anybody ever offered to pay me to write. It was
How
pretty
did you
good.
feel? It's a pretty good
Okay.
day,
Yeah, pretty good day.
right? It's like, man, wow. So Star Trek was your first professional writing gig.
It was the first thing I ever tried to write, the first thing I ever taught myself. I taught myself to write this kind of stuff by using Star Trek, which is good and bad, but this worked out for
Same,
me.
same thing here. It was my first professional. It was a short story for Strange New World, but it was my first professional, and I was like, "What?" So that was really, it was really. For me, and I don't know about for you, but for me, it was an acknowledgement that all the things I was always telling myself they were legitimate. That, oh, I do have a certain level of craft, because nobody's going to pay you to do something if it's not at a certain level, right? So that was really, really, really great. Wow. Okay, so you do the short story, you're doing the novel, you're off to the races in Star Trek, right? Is that?
Yeah, and then Marco, when we were done with the manuscript for Fusion, he
Mhm.
called and he's like, so there's another editor here who's looking for somebody to work on an Alias book. Have you ever seen Alias? Do you have any interest in it? So I was like, "Yeah, I actually love Alias." He's like,
Yes.
"Great, I'm going to set you guys up." So I talked to him and I wrote, and he asked me to write an Alias book. And then he asked me, "Is there anything else you want to do?" And he gave me a list of things, and Buffy was on that list. And I was like, "Oh, I'd love to do a Buffy book." So I did that.
Right,
And by
right.
then, um, so there had been this weird period where everything was ramping up to what was going to be the relaunches for everything because of David Mack's Destiny trilogy. And he had been working on
Yes.
it for a while with Marco Margaret, and it was all this big secret thing or whatever. And I can't remember exactly how, but the long and the short of it was Marco reached out and he's like, "Okay, so we've got this thing, and until it's done, you can't really start your work. But you're going to write the first Voyager book after this thing. and you're going to take Voyager forward. And I think he contracted me to do 2 books right off the bat: Voyager, Full Circle, and what became Full Circle and Unworthy.
Right.
And so I spent the next several months like reading David's manuscript and then seeing Peter David's manuscript for whatever that was before Dishonor, and then
Great.
connecting with Keith. And
Uh,
I'm trying to, I think Andy or it was just Mike was doing, there were like 5 or 6 of us who were all
yeah, yeah.
taking, and then
Dayton was
David
probably in
George,
there too.
right? Yeah, we were all taking different pieces of this puzzle after Destiny and taking our little, and going to be running with it. And it was even at the point where like David was going to be doing stuff in Destiny, and I was like, could you not? He's like, I'm going to kill Owen Paris. I'm like, okay, but can you not do, and like,
Right,
and
right, right.
so we were like this weird extended writers room for that period of time, trying to sync up everything we were doing for each other. And it was great. Like we were all very helpful, and everybody was very generous and patient and understanding and like whatever. Um and then I did Full Circle, which was a beast. And then I was in the middle of Unworthy when Margaret got laid off, and that's when I became Margaret became my editor.
Right.
And it was funny because when Marco hired me, he was like, I want you to do the first couple of books, but then I'm going to want to bring other people in. And I'm like, that's cool, like whatever.
Yeah.
But once Margaret took over, she was like, you understand this like nobody I've ever seen. Just keep going. So that's kind of how it worked.
Yeah. I think at that time there was, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was no Star Trek on the air by that time,
Correct.
right?
That is
So
correct.
in many ways, you all were the voice of Star Trek, keeping it going, keeping it afloat in the social consciousness in many ways. I mean, of course, other than, you know, previous shows that everyone always watches, but I
Yeah.
mean, for new material, you
Yeah.
all were keeping it alive and the lifeblood of Star Trek. And I know because at that time, for me, I realized I didn't know a lot about publishing. So I took some time to just try and educate myself about publishing and writing. I knew I could write, but
Yeah.
I didn't know about the world of publishing and writing. So I had
Yeah.
to educate myself. But everyone that knew anything about Trek was dialed in to what all of you were doing. And it was myself included, and it was a beautiful thing. So now my question is, during all of that, where does this happen?
Um, okay.
You see
So
it?
yeah, Spacecraft. Yeah. So
Space Crunch.
that was a Dayton Ward
Dayton
project.
Ward asked us on this. It was my
Yeah.
first time I knew about this phenomenal story in person, Kirsten Beyer. I'm like, this is a really dope story. And
That's a good one, isn't
and
it?
right, we're all in it. Dayton, you, several people, James Swallow.
Yeah.
When did that happen? In this all
I mean, I think I was in the middle of writing books. I think by
wow,
that time, I had become friends with Dayton and Kevin. Like, I
right.
literally remember the first time I went to shore leave to be there for Fusion, like, as I'm the writer myself now, not I'm somebody's guest, right? I was sitting down at meet the pros hallway, all by myself, didn't really know anybody. He was like, and Kevin Dillmore was across the room, and he stood up and he walked over and he shook my hand and he introduced himself. And he's like, I don't know who you are, but I really want to get to know you. I'm like, great. And so then I started hanging out with him and Dayton and, all the things. Right.
Such a
And
great community of people.
oh my God,
Seriously,
my
seriously.
dearest friends now for years. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and, and I don't know. I mean, I just remember at some point in there, I don't remember what time and period it was exactly. I feel like it was early though. I probably hadn't written children. I don't think Nora had been born yet because I probably
Wow.
wouldn't have had time if she had been
Wow.
born by then. Um, but yeah, Dayton just called. He's like, I'm going to do this anthology. Do you want to do a short? So it's, military in space, like whatever. And I was like, sure, I'll give it a
Yeah,
go. And I just wrote the thing and sent it off. He's like, thanks. I'm like, great. And now
yeah, yeah.
it's in the world. And I think I did another one. There was one, there's another one called Pangea that I did for Michael Jan Friedman. Um, that ended up being at a really hard time. Like I almost didn't get that story out but I think
Mm,
that's what I did. And yeah, it was just like it's the thing. You know, people, they're friends, they want to do a thing, and
right.
they call you, and you help them.
So here's a question that I have for you. I discussed this on the show with Una McCormick and David
I
Goodman.
love Una.
Uh, phenomenal, just
Yeah.
phenomenal. We were talking about the biographies,
Hmm.
and I said that for Star Trek, and not to in any way, I don't want anyone to think that that I or even they were sounding egotistical or anything, but it has become a lot easier to write Star Trek material for me in my head than original material because it's
Mm.
I don't know if it's because I've absorbed all of this, from being a kid till now, but I know these characters. It's harder for me to come up with something that's totally apart from that and different. And they agreed. They said, yeah, maybe because it's all in our social consciousness, and in our brains. And my I guess my question is, what is your level of comfort? Do you find like from original material, it's the same level, or is it easier because is Star Trek just easier? How do you feel about that?
The more I go along, I would say it's the same.
Oh,
Um, and I say that because, like, I, for me, Star Trek is like this massive living universe. And
sure.
there are pieces of it that are very clear up there. We know what happened during this time with these, and then there's these vast swaths of things that are blank, that we have no
Right,
idea, that have never really been made real for us.
right.
And I am always, and that it may be the tie-in writer in me, right? But I am always looking for what's an area of this that we haven't explored? What is a point of view that has not had a really strong voice yet in the world of Star Trek, right? Like, I
Hmm.
love a good bridge with a captain and a science officer and an engineer and a doctor and a pilot and whatever. But like, um, the Federation is a functioning
Vast.
society and civilization
Right,
that
right,
that works without money and
right,
like
right,
there's all these
right.
and I'm now the person, for better or worse, where they're like, hey, we want to do a thing like this, and I'm the only person who can go, okay, well, if you do that, then that means that our government does this and we do that, and no, we would never. So like, I for me, there's nothing that can't be a Star Trek story. I
Yeah,
tend to
I
start with whatever the story is. And if you
hmm.
need me to tell it a Star Trek, I can do that. And if you want me to do it otherwise, I'm also happy to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
I
I do both.
definitely
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I definitely agree because I know when I did the autobiography, I really wanted to pay attention to like Earth and Louisiana and New Orleans, because these are Louisiana, New Orleans is a place that since it really was created, it's been a service industry of food and music. And what does that look like in the 24th century when you have replicators and holodecks and you
Yeah.
don't need to go to a restaurant or go to a jazz club and do you still
Yeah.
do those kind of things? Do you
Yeah.
still hold on to those personal things? And so a lot of people said that they like that part of the book because it's like, what's the average everyday person doing on Earth?
Yeah. Well, and I like remember when Janeway was going to go back to Earth after she came back to life and was going to have this long period there.
Right.
She was going to hang out with her mom and her sister for a bit. I was thinking about her mom. And I was like, wouldn't it be awesome if, like, she has a replicator, she knows how to use it, but she chooses to make her recipes from fresh grown, real food. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Right.
always an option and a convenience if you want it, but there is, I have to believe there is some essential substantive difference
Yes.
between the real thing and, you know,
Yes. Then
the
replicated
rearranged atoms that form the thing, right?
replicated tofu, right? I
Um,
mean, right.
Yeah, because I taught my daughter. I love to bake, and I taught my daughter to bake growing up. And I have this weird theory that because people eat homemade cookies, and this is the best thing I've ever had. I'm like, it's a Toll House cookie. It's the same recipe, but when you make something like that with your hands, and you're thinking about the people who are going to eat it while you're making it, like there is love that gets imbued in that stuff, and I actually think that's what makes it special, for other
Yes.
people, and that's something that can't be created out of a machine.
Yeah. You're pouring emotion into it,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's unique
And
to
I'd like to
human.
think that Catherine Janeway's mom was among many of the people who actually retained that value. It's
Yeah.
not anything she ever expressed, but it makes perfect sense to me that she came from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody
No,
who didn't have
yeah.
who had a very broad view of what the experience of living was supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the attitude that I thought that there would be places on Earth where people would say, we're happy to be in the 24th century, but we don't necessarily want to adopt like all replicators and all holodecks. We still want to hold on to all of this history that makes us ideally human,
Absolutely.
you know? So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, and that like there's this question in my mind because in one way you can look at the Federation as like the massive homogenization of culture. And
Right.
yet I think the Federation exists so that all of these beautiful, unique cultures can thrive within it without becoming homogenized. I think you can make both cases for it. But
Yeah.
that's what you're speaking to is the way because like if people say yes, I would rather do it this way, the Federation's gonna be like, cool, whatever. Enjoy, you
Right.
know?
And you should be able to make both cases because in an accepting society, you don't want to be binary like the Borg. It's not a one or a zero, right? It
Yeah.
should be. That's the whole point of IDIC and infinite diversity. And right. So I know we're preaching
Yeah.
to the choir,
Yeah.
but that's the whole
Yes.
point of what
Yes.
it should be like in the 24th century, right? Right.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I wanna move to um when you started to branch away. Now you now have you're a novelist, you have novels under your belt, you're definitely rooted confidently, um dominantly in Star Trek. When do you start to move into television production for Star Trek?
So when I started this with Voyager, the answer was I wanted to be a writer for television. I wasn't doing it because I wanted to write books. And so I
Right.
wrote, a couple of I wrote a couple of features. I like did a whole bunch of, learning that. And then I sort of fell into the book rabbit hole and I did that for many years. And I didn't have a ton of time to write other forms outside of that. So I think it's 2014, summer 2014. A whole bunch of us got together and took this massive trip down to Houston to go to NASA. And we got a VIP tour and we were asked to speak to real astronauts, which was scary. And, but it's just like me and all my best friends and our spouses all like hanging out for a weekend. Like it was great. And it was at that time that, and I don't know if I was part of that conversation at first, but David Mack and David George were sitting around talking about the fact that in a few years, it was going to be 10 years since any Star Trek had been on the air, since Enterprise had
Wow.
ended. And it made sense that whoever was doing Star Trek might want to. I mean, we had the movies at that point, right? We had the 2009 movie, and I think we probably had Beyond by then.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
or Into Darkness.
Into
I don't think
darkness.
Beyond had
Into
come out
darkness.
yet,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
so
Yeah, yeah.
like they were making the movies, but they weren't. We were like, there's gonna be another TV show. So after that big weekend, because David George and David lived here for a long time in LA with me, and he and his wife Karen and my husband David and our daughter, like we would all hang out, like we were all just friends.
That's nice. That's
And
good.
he came to me and he was like, we were having one of our lunches, and he was like, so I think there's going to be a new series, and I think if anybody should be creating it, it should be us because we are the ones who have been keeping this story alive for the last
Yes.
basically 15 years at that point.
Right.
And I was like, sure, why not? So he and David Mack and Marco and I sat down and started working on what we thought the next Star Trek television series should be. And very shortly after that, Marco dropped out because he was getting very busy with other things and he couldn't. But so it remained David Mack and David George and I. So we worked on it for about a year, a little more than a year. And about the time it came time to figure out who we were going to pitch this thing to, like how we were going to, get in front of the right people, an announcement came out in the trades that CBS had signed a deal with KO Paper Products, which was Alex's company at the time, to make a new Star Trek series. And I remember I remember that morning because they were both on the phone. They were so upset. They were just like, "Oh my God, all this work, we're totally screwed." And I was like, "Yeah, except my daughter went to a preschool that was halfway between my house and the office I was working at the time.
Okay.
That's literally why I chose this school. I could be 10 minutes away from her in
Wow.
either direction, right? Which in
That's
LA
great.
is ridiculous, right? So, and there was another little boy at this school, and his mother was Heather Cady, who was the president of KO Paper Products. Now, I didn't know this for most of the years that we were there. We were just two moms sitting there. I mean, day one, I remember she and
Right.
I were sitting next to each other watching our kids, and we're supposed to sneak out and leave because they're like of that age where you can't, And I'm just like, do we go now? And she's like, well, because she had an older one too. She's like, oh, I did this, but I don't know if it's gonna. So we were just mom friends.
Right. Right.
But I knew her. And I by then I knew she worked in television. I didn't quite know what she did, but like somehow like I'd seen some interviews and it had all come together and I was like, "Oh, but Heather's the president of KO." So I had my agent call her and ask her if she would take a meeting with Kirsten Beyer, David Mack and David George. And they were like, "Absolutely. Come on in." So I went in that day. Boys flew to town. Well, David was here. David Mack flew to town.
Right.
We walk in the door, and Heather looks at me because she didn't know me as Kirsten Beyer. She knew me as Kirsten Permenter, which is my married name, as Honora's mom. And she's like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "I'm Kirsten Beyer." And she wrote, "You wrote all these books?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "It's like you were Clark Kent, and now you're Superman." And I was like, "Sorry." And then we sat down and we pitched the story.
Right.
And they loved it, but they were still at that point about a year away from like figuring out what they were going to do. And what they were doing was really looking for a well-established showrunner with Trek pedigree, who ended up being Brian Fuller, that they hired. But what happened in that meeting was they didn't buy our story, but they bought me. They just, I think a lot of it honestly has to do with the fact that I'm a woman who knows Star
Yeah.
Trek inside and out and has this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so
That's
they hired me, but
fantastic.
10 years later, I'm the only person who was there at the beginning that's still here. So, I'm doing something right.
All right. So I have to ask, what did it feel like? All right. So you do the pitch and everything in life never happens the way we always expect, right? Isn't that what Lennon said? That life is what happens when while you're making plans, right?
Yep.
So you fast forward a little bit, and so now this thing is actually starting to happen, and you're going to be a part of it, and it's Discovery. What did that feel like? How did you feel about that? Because I mean, it's obvious you're now leveling up, but at the same time, there was expectation on you, obviously, right? So how did you feel about
So,
that?
um,
And were you the only woman in the room at the time, or?
I was the only other woman in the room at the time, was part of a writing team. It was I'm sorry, Gretchen Berg and Aaron, and I keep saying Aaron Byers, but it's not. What was Aaron's? Harbert. Yeah, Aaron Harbert, who became the showrunners after Brian left after the first 8 months. She was the only other woman in the room, and she knew nothing about Star Trek. The only people in that room who did know anything about Star Trek, kind of on day one, well, Nicholas Meyer was there.
Right, of course.
And pretty soon, Joe Manoski was there. And Joe was a trip. I love that man so much. And his episodes have always been among my most favorite of all Star Trek episodes. And we would be sitting there and talking about an idea or whatever. And he'd be like, "Hey, you know what could happen?" And he'd throw it out there. And I'd be like, "Yeah, you did that in season 4, episode whatever of The Next Generation." He's like, "I did." I'm like, "Do you ever watch your own shows? What are you fucking talking about?" "Yes, you did." So anyway, so here's what I realized very, very quickly. I knew everything there's to know about Star Trek, and if I didn't know it, I knew where to go find it very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
by that, I mean, I had written 1,000,000+ words of Star Trek at that point. Like, I know what color the phasers are. Like, this is all just living rent free in my head.
Which is great.
Very few of the people in that room, nobody in that room, I don't think even Brian, although Brian was probably the closest, knew Star Trek the way I knew it. But the thing is, I also know something else about Star Trek that is very difficult to quantify, which is how do you make an idea a Star Trek story? What is the Star Trek version of that thing? What is the feeling that this is supposed to evoke in the person who's experiencing the story? And it is a very specific Star Trek thing. And I know it. It's like pornography. I know it when I see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they'll be saying, "Hey, we want to do this," and my little flags go, or "Oh my God, yes, that's it." You know what I mean? And that was how Brian and I started to sort of like really start to sort of groove with each other, because I'd be like, "Oh, it's this thing." He'd be like, "Right," and then you do that, and I'm like, "Yeah," you know. But I also was very clear that I didn't know jack shit about how television was made. Like, I'd never done it. I mean, I had done it
Right.
myself, but the process of you know what I'm talking about now. Sitting in a room, having people throw around these ideas, and figuring out how you're gonna and who's leading and because it's not always the showrunner. The showrunner isn't usually in the room. It's
Right.
usually the number two who's like sort of trying to pull everything together, or sometimes it's the writer for whoever's episode that is. Sometimes they're leading the room. Like it just, and as the season goes on and people start leaving to go write stuff and produce stuff, whatever, it all keeps changing. Like
And it moves fast,
it's the weirdest
and you
way
have to be
to,
on
yeah, all the time, all the time.
all the time. All the time.
So
Yeah.
I didn't know anything. And my feeling was, well, I could be upset about this and I could be frustrated about this and I could like force myself to be like, but I'm the, yeah, I have, or I could close my mouth and open my ears and fucking learn. And that's what I did. I sat there
Yes.
quietly and I watched. I'm like, oh, they're writing stuff on a board. I wonder why. I wonder what that means. Oh, and this is I see teaser act 1, act 2. Okay, all right. And this is, and what kind of stuff are we? And I mean, it was like a couple of years of this weird graduate school program of this is how we do this with these
Right.
particular people. And now I've done it with, I don't know, 13 or 14 or 15 different rooms of people over the last 10 years. And I know that now every room has its own sort of way of working and function. It's all similar, but unique every single time you
Mhm.
do it. But what I did was I decided I was just going to learn. And
Yeah.
I learned.
Yeah. You have to keep yourself open. I think no matter what level you're at, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
keep learning. And it's interesting because I understand what you're saying. I know when something is Star Trek or when it's not, and I've said this before, but I've gotten it down to these four elements: is science, exploration, friendship, and hope.
Mm-hmm.
Like foundational for Star Trek. But it's even more than those words. In a certain way, they have to be delivered, and then that becomes Star Trek. You could put those things together, and it's still not Star Trek. You
Yeah. Well, it has to be about something. We
it
have to be
always has.
talking about something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And with Star Trek, with all these things, it's very easy to do all the surface bells, and you know what I mean? And yeah, it's like I had the showrunner once who was very like, we're going to build the story, and then you're going to come in at the end and you're going to make it Star Trek. And I'm like, it's like you're asking me to bake you a cake, and you're telling me that what I'm going to do is put on the sprinkles and like the frosting flowers, and that's what's
Right,
going to make it
right.
Star Trek. And what I need you to understand is that what
It's
makes it
not.
Star Trek is the eggs and the flour and the sugar.
Yeah, the
You don't get
specific. Yeah,
those
yeah,
right, there is nothing I can
yeah,
do at the end to make it Star Trek.
yeah, yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. So, so here's my question. Something else that I realized is Star Trek, and it's a 60-year next year, 60-year franchise, right? And you have canon to consider,
Mhm.
but for me, the biggest thing is always not so much is canon, but not so much, but is accessibility. 'Cause I want
Hmm.
people to be able to come to it outside of the fan base, And like when I did Cisco, my idea in my head was I wanted somebody to see the cover of the book at the airport and say, "Oh, I haven't looked at anything Star Trek in 20 years, but I can pick this up, thumb through it, and I'll be back in that universe." So my question is, how does accessibility? How do you all consider, accessibility when you're doing the shows?
So there's like there's kind of a big rule up at the top, which is in order to enjoy whatever story we're telling, it cannot be required that the audience has seen 900 hours of Star Trek.
Right.
And and if we want to reference something within the universe, it can't require a page and a half info dump of exposition about, oh, because here's this thing that happened to me once, right?
Right.
So it makes it tricky when you're dealing with legacy stuff. And the thing is, at the beginning, we weren't doing that. These are all new characters. They're not, we don't know, as we went on, Vernon became Spock's sister and had been raised by Sarek and Amanda and like whatever. But for the most part, we weren't butting up against canon in those kinds of ways where we were going to contradict. I mean, later, sure, with the Gorn and whatever, but like initially we were studiously avoiding that stuff. And I was always like the police officer. And it's weird too, because like I had the worst job imaginable, because the one thing you're never allowed to say in a writer's room is no.
It's no,
right?
You have to say.
But I was literally the person who was hired to police these people and say, no, you can't do that. But what I learned is that if I said no, it just sort of like killed the vibe of the room. What I had to do was wait to open my mouth until I knew how to say, you can't do it that way, but here's how you can do it. Yeah. And in order to be able to do that, I had to understand what the pitch was actually going for. What's the thing you're trying to accomplish here, emotionally or plot-wise or for a character? Because if I understand that, then I can put the right spin on it that will not break canon, as opposed to the thing they're trying to do, which would, right?
Right. Have a no, say no, but have something to offer in place of the no.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we build from there.
Right. Wow. So we have a few more minutes. I wanted to ask you so much, but I want to ask you about big swings, because I remember like when Discovery came out, and we haven't even gotten to like the Picard or anything, but I remember when Discovery came out, and you're doing it now again with Strange New Worlds. Is Discovery season 1, I loved. Season 2, I was like, oh wow, they're really going there. Because season 2 said to me as a writer, season 2 said the one thing that everyone always tells you to be afraid of is like matching and lining up canon, and and you all said we're going to embrace that, and we're going to own it, and we're going to do it, and we're going to line it up, and when we're done, it's going to be perfect. It's going to be seamless, and it was. It was, so can you talk a little bit about taking big swings in Star Trek, and I guess taking big swings in writing, because it was so brave to me to do that, to bring Spock in, to bring in Pike. It was so many big swings.
So those things. Okay, so here's the thing: those things didn't originate with me. Those things were the opposite of what I had been told we were going to be doing until we got to season 2. In fact, so I also had this weird job. John Van Sitters, who has been with the company for 30-something years, forever, and who was the guy who, when we were writing novels and they got sent to CBS for approval, they went to him. He was usually the guy who read them, the outlines, and then the books, but there were also a couple other people who would sometimes do the reading, but we would get either notes from CBS or approval from CBS on those novels. When I got the job on Discovery, he came to me and he was like, okay, I have a job for you. And I'm like, I think I already have a job. But turns out, no, I'm going to do 2. He's like, we're going to be writing books and comics and doing games about this new series, Discovery, and whatever other new series come along. And because in the past, the books have always been shut out of the creative process, and they have sort of become their own little, universe, for him and for me, honestly, as a reader, like those early books that was just like, well, here's a lost episode of like whatever. They're fine, and they can be cool, and sometimes they can be really interesting, and sometimes they can be absolutely extraordinary, like John M. Force's Final Reflection. But like, they're just sort of, like whatever. He's like, I want to elevate them, because he's like, what you guys have been doing in the books is really elevating the form. What you guys do now is not what we ever used to do before. And we want to continue that on with the new series. So we want you to be a liaison between Simon and Schuster and between, I think it wasn't IDW. Who was it at first? I can't remember. But whoever the comic book company was. I should know because I worked for them and they were very nice people. And whoever the game companies were that were in the early days, and they're going to be asking you story about Discovery and what it's going to do, and you're going to like keep them in the loop so that they know where they can and can't go, and like give them openings of story that they could tell, because the room. So, which means the first Discovery book written by David Mack, I was like, okay, let's have David do it, and let's, he and I'll. So David and I was telling him what we were doing in the room and the kinds of stories we were telling, and we kept coming up with this stuff. And what would happen is I would tell it to Brian. Okay, so imagine little Burnham at school for the first time, and the kids are mean to her, and she's got this. He's like, well, we're going to do that in an episode. And it goes up on the board. And I'm like, sure. And this happened like multiple times until we finally got to this thing where Brian was like, the one thing we will never do is we will never bring Spock on the show. So it was like, great. So David and I lovingly craft this really great book about Burnham and Spock meeting each other after not having seen each other since they were kids, and had this
Right.
whole story and this whole adventure and whatever. And this was the first Discovery book. And then I walk in the door for season 2, and they're like, we're bringing Spock, and I'm like, you are what? And, the truth of the matter is the tie, and we'd had these conversations multiple times. Like, the tie-ins can't wag the dog. Like, we
Right.
can't
Right.
ever. It has to only
No.
work. But like,
Follow. Yeah.
we had 50 meetings about this book, and I told you exactly what we were going to do, and I was told it was fine, and now it's not fine, and that just fucking sucked. And that has happened plenty of times, kind of along the way in this journey of trying to keep being able to make the ancillary materials richer for the fans
Right.
as they're experiencing the story, but also sometimes getting contradicted. I actually think one of the places we succeeded was in the very first comics that we did for Discovery, which was the Takavma, that series of comics that Mike and I did, because that backstory never got overwritten. And I think it really did serve to help the Laurel character and the, Ash Tyler and all that. So anyway, like, it's been an ongoing experiment, but yeah.
Let me ask you, as a writer,
Yeah.
You've written in several different mediums now,
Mhm.
from novels, teleplays, comics,
Mhm.
the con is
The audio, yeah.
Audio. What do you do anything differently, or do you change up how you do? For me, I've done screenplays, I've done, short stories, novel now, um, gaming. And for me, it's all about the compression of time. Time works differently in all these mediums. So I'm a
Yeah.
little curious, how does it work for you?
I think what I focus on is what's the most important perspective. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the character perspective. When I'm writing books, it's all about the deep internal organic journey of all of these characters. When I'm
Sure.
writing screenplays or teleplays, it's about what can I see? What am I seeing?
Right. In the
All the
medium,
way
right,
through. What am I
right.
seeing? Right? And where do I get to let an actor say 2 words and give me a look, as opposed to having them explain their whole, right?
Less is more. Yeah.
Subtext. When I'm writing for audio, it's what can I hear? Close your eyes. You can only set this by what you can hear. So I immerse myself in whatever thing the form requires. But until I have like the what am I mad about that I'm actually talking about in this story,
Mhm.
none of it happens. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's where it always
Mhm.
starts.
Mhm. I'm always looking for authentic moments for my characters. I think authenticity, is something, because I'm always worried about. I want readers to be able to identify with these characters in these surreal, sci-fi settings. So whether it's Trek or something original, I want them to be able to see themselves in what's happening. And I think
Totally.
authenticity is where you
Yeah,
find
and
that.
and where that lives, I think, is in the very, very specific details, right? Like,
Yeah.
there was this example. I remember when because this is a lesson I've been learning as I've been going, right? Transitioning from books where you can say all the things to this very, very
Right,
poetic
bring it
form
down. Right.
it is difficult. But like, I remember I was writing, I can't remember. I think it might have been the first. I think it might have been the first episode of Strange New Worlds I got to co-write. And I was writing a scene between Pike and Batel at the beginning where she walks in. And I think in the first couple of drafts, it was, hi, how was your day? Kind of like whatever. And and then I remember being like, okay, wait a minute. These guys are in a relationship. They've been together for a really long time. They know all this stuff. And oh my God, is that your mother's sauce? came to mind. And I was like, see, that's the difference, right? The thing the
Yeah.
story needs is, hi, honey, how was your day? The
Right.
thing that the episode needs is that your mom saw us? Because that tells us everything we need to know about this relationship without,
Right.
you know, that's
Without
what you're
saying it,
always
right?
looking for.
Subtext.
That's what you're looking for.
Right. Absolutely. All right. We're coming to a close. This has been an
Oh,
incredible hour. I really,
it's
really, I've
been an
had
hour.
it's really it's been about an hour. It's been about an hour. It's just crazy. It goes by so fast.
Hmm.
For my last question, I have found that Star Trek has been a conversation with, I think, first America and now the world over 6 decades. And I guess my question to you is, what do you think is the importance of Star Trek uh, today? What do you think is its importance?
My answer before this last year would have been to keep always in front of us this truth that we are capable of more than we believe we are, that all things are possible. And we just have to look inside to find them and then make them real through a lot of hard work, right?
Right.
The aspirational, because to me, what Star Trek has always pointed to is the continuing evolution of humanity toward a better version of itself, right? And
Yes.
we've reflected in all these alien species and whatever, but ultimately it's all about us. What's the best that we have to offer?
Yes.
Now I'm in this period where I'm starting to understand that the way I have viewed the past and our history, the sort of version I was either sold or that I maybe sold myself, or maybe the culture sold me, was not at all true. There's a lot that I did not ever understand or see it. These perspectives were never like put in front of me for me to go, oh, well, that makes a heck of a lot of sense. And a lot of that comes from the fact that of this feeling, at the beginning of the year of, wait, we have now all gone completely off the deep end and absolutely lost our way. What the
Yeah.
fuck? How did that happen? Because in the
Yeah.
world as I understood it, it couldn't happen. So I've done a lot of thinking and a lot of reading and a lot of like, oh my God. And now I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. I understand how we got here. We've actually kind of always been here. It just was sort of papered over and looked a lot better, right? And I'm starting to question like the value of systems that don't really function for the majority of people that they're supposed to live within, right? And who systems serve. And I'm applying this to Star Trek, and I'm like, gosh, I wonder. Because I don't think Star Trek can be a completely perfect, unbroken history of success, right? Now, we got to the burn, and like there's like, obviously we've had our, but I also think that there are stories worth telling right now. I think that the things that we need are less about the sort of like, here's the perfect future. It's about in the imperfect. How do we still find that thing within ourselves that will fight and resist and illuminate the path
Hmm.
forward? Because the goal is still the same. It's going to be much harder to get there than I thought, than I used to think. And so now I'm wanting to like focus on what is the real work of that. And I think Star Trek is yet, again, we can tell any story in Star Trek. And I think that's the one worth telling right now.
Any
I don't know that I'm
story.
going to get to do it, but that's what I'm interested in right now.
Right. Really, thank you so much for that. I think about the 60s and what the 60s was to so many of us, to all of us, for many different reasons, and in the midst of that, here comes Mr. Gene Roddenberry with his show, speaking about these things that people grabbed onto in the midst of all those things that was happening, 65, 66, all these things were happening. 66.
Mhm.
And then like now, in the midst of all these things happening, there's Star Trek. And I think people grab onto that as well. So, I'm really, really thankful for your time today, but I'm also thankful that you're one of the guiding voices for Star Trek, that you're thinking all these things and feeling all these things, and this is you're at that helm, or one of the people at that helm, guiding this ship that we've been on for 60 years. It's really important.
Well, I mean, I do work very closely with the people who are really in charge. And what I'm looking forward to is, because here was the nice thing about it when it was just me and my books, like, and this is what you enjoy that you maybe are taking for granted a little bit, is that it was, there were very few people who were going to come back and go, oh, you must change this and you must do that. And do you know what I mean? Like it was mine.
Right,
And I could
right,
do with
right,
what I
right,
need. This
right.
is an incredibly this takes thousands of people to tell these stories. And it's always a compromise, always a negotiation, always a what's real, what's possible, what can we get done in the amount of time we have, right? There's always this sort of feeling of that. But like in working on Con for the last couple of years, I was finally able to sort of, because it's audio and not, I was able to
Hmm.
sort of like, a lot of those things fell away. And there was a much purer vision that I could sort of like reach for and work toward and hone and ultimately create. And it is for me, Con is the best reflection of the idea that I had that and in terms of how it got executed and like what it actually became. Um, so like I know I have power. I know that I have like proximity and I know that I'm an important voice in all of this. I can't wait until I get to be more of a guiding voice on story than I have been able to be up until this point.
Yeah,
I
that's
hope that comes.
amazing.
I mean, maybe it won't. Maybe it'll have to be on other things, but I'm hoping.
Yeah, hoping. Yeah. Well, I mean, your work has been stellar. So
You are very
you
kind.
Oh, I think a lot of people know that your work has been stellar. Kirsten Beyer, thank you so much for this hour. It's been an incredible pleasure speaking with you. So I want to say just thank you. Also, I want to speak to our audience and say thank you for your participation in this fantastic community. If you're new, we ask that you like and subscribe to the show so that you don't miss any of incredible conversations like the one that we just had. And here at Whole Soul of the Story, our goal is to always have authentic discussions from an array of diverse perspectives. So if you enjoyed our guests and conversations, and we ask you please consider sponsoring the show, supporting the show, or if you want to get your brand in front of our loyal audience, then click the link in the show descriptions or visit Sci-Fi Sisters .com/sponsors to become part of the conversation. Kirsten Beyer, it's been an incredible hour. I just thank you. Just thank you. It's been
My
uplifting for
pleasure.
me. Thank you
Yeah,
so
my
much.
pleasure. I can't
Thank
wait
you.
till we talk again.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mhm.
Take care.